The snow slammed against the garage doors like a battering ram. 5 gleaming cars, Claire Wells' entire collection, the HOA president herself, were buried under a wave of white fury. The avalanche had begun the moment the retaining wall came down, a mass of snow and clay racing downhill with unstoppable force. Claire yelled from her sunroom, her voice carrying across the cul-de-sac, barking orders and threats as the polished tires disappeared beneath the frozen tide. She wasn't just upset, she was furious, using her HOA authority like a weapon even now. I raised my coffee mug, calm as the storm devoured her prized vehicles. A police cruiser skidded to a stop, lights flashing, deputies stepping carefully over the edge of the frozen chaos. "Sir, what happened here?" he shouted. I smiled faintly. I followed city orders. The wall had to go. Replacement denied. Looks like the universe decided to enforce HOA aesthetics for her. Snow and debris rolled like a river, relentless and unstoppable. And yet, I had a feeling this was only the beginning. Claire had no idea what I really had planned. Claire Wells stood on her balcony like she owned the entire cul-de-sac. Well, technically she did. As HOA president, she believed she had the final say over every curb, lawn, and mailbox. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the remnants of my retaining wall. "This is unacceptable," she barked, pointing at the exposed slope like it was a personal affront. She had moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago, bringing with her a meticulously curated idea of perfection: snow-free driveways, uniform fencing, and, of course, garages filled only with the most aesthetically pleasing vehicles. That included her collection of 5 high-end cars, now teetering dangerously below my property line. "I cannot have this monstrosity in view for my HOA meeting next week," she said, voice rising, each word carefully measured to assert dominance. "Remove it. Immediately." Claire's entitlement wasn't subtle, it was a weapon. Every complaint, every letter, every call to the city inspector was designed to pressure me into compliance. She didn't care about physics, cost, or safety, only her version of visual perfection. I stayed on the balcony watching her pace, knowing she had no idea the chain reaction she had started. Snow piled high behind my old wall, the slope unstable, warnings ignored. Claire Wells' HOA president might have thought she controlled the neighborhood, but she hadn't counted on what I was about to unleash. Snow had been stacking against the old retaining wall for days, and every morning I could see Claire Wells pacing along the cul-de-sac, binoculars in hand, inspecting the slope like a general surveying a battlefield. Her complaints started small, thinly veiled in concern for neighborhood safety, but quickly escalated into sharp letters and angry calls to the city. One Tuesday morning, I found an orange notice taped to my front door, notice of violation. It cited my unsightly snow wall, unpermitted, unsafe, and demanded removal immediately. The words glared at me like they were underlined in fire. I glanced down the hill at the snow piled high behind the wall, frozen and solid, a perfectly functional barrier holding back hundreds of tons of winter accumulation. Claire appeared at her window at that exact moment, waving a hand and calling down, "I hope the city enforces what's right for the neighborhood." Her voice carried across the street, filled with that unmistakable mixture of satisfaction and authority. I sipped my coffee unfazed. She thought she was intimidating me, but all she had accomplished was escalating the tension. By the next day, I noticed neighbors giving me curious glances. Snowstorms were common, but a violation notice for a snow wall, that was unique. The friction had moved from polite annoyance to formal complaint, and now I had an official target on my back. 3 days later, Gary, a city inspector, arrived in a Prius that looked like it had been designed for maximum bureaucratic efficiency and minimum intimidation. He carried a clipboard, and he carried an attitude that screamed, "I follow paperwork, not physics." Claire materialized almost immediately at her property line coat, pristine gloves, immaculate. "Morning, Inspector," she said, voice light but sharp. "I trust you'll see this eyesore removed today." She didn't look at me. She never did. She only looked at the authority she believed could enforce her will. Gary didn't even glance at the snow wall. He looked at the paperwork first, then at me. "Sir, we've received a complaint regarding your retaining wall. It's unpermitted, violates Code 44B regarding neighborhood aesthetics." I frowned. "It's a snow wall. It's been here decades, holding back the slope perfectly stable." Gary shrugged. "The city requires removal. Replacement requires HOA approval for aesthetic continuity." He handed me the forms. I scanned them, realizing the catch: Claire had preemptively blocked any replacement, citing design inconsistency with neighborhood standards. I looked up. Claire was grinning, hands on hips, as if victory was already hers. Every inch of snow behind that wall represented not just potential avalanches but leverage. If the wall came down without a replacement, she had no idea what she was inviting. I called Sal the Shovel Marino, the only contractor I trusted to handle extreme snow removal without panicking. Sal had moved mountains before. This was a hill of frozen winter fury, hundreds of tons of snow compacted over weeks. He arrived with his excavator diesel engine growling eyes, lighting up at the sight of the slope. "Boss, this is a powder keg," he said, tapping the dense snow and clay mixture. "You remove the wall, and it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it slides." I handed him the city's abatement notice. Friday. Full compliance. No excuses. Sal laughed a low, gravelly sound. "You're a sick man, Alex. But I like it." He meant it. The irony was that Claire had orchestrated her own risk. She blocked a replacement wall, forced the removal, and now the snow was ready to obey gravity. I spent the next 2 days shoveling paths and prepping safety markers, doing everything I could without touching the core snow mass. Every morning, I watched Claire outside, pacing, adjusting her HOA-approved patio furniture, oblivious to the ticking clock on the slope behind her garage. The stakes became crystal clear. This wasn't a simple HOA argument anymore. One miscalculation, one ignored warning, and her collection of 5 high-end cars, her prized possessions, would be gone. And all of it legally would not be my fault. By the end of Layer 3, the friction and system enforcement had escalated into a full-blown disaster waiting to happen. The slope was unstable, the wall had to come down, and Claire had no way to stop what was coming except to realize too late the consequences of her entitlement. By midweek, the city had doubled down. Gary returned this time with the county surveyor in tow. Both carried clipboards, eyes glued to forms, not to the steep slope behind my house. Claire Wells followed her designer notebook, clutched like a shield, ready to assert HOA supremacy. "You're responsible for slope stabilization, sir," Gary said, voice robotic. "Removal order stands. Replacement requires adjacent owner approval." I swallowed hard. That meant no legal replacement wall. Claire had strategically blocked anything affordable. A limestone wall or reinforced cinder blocks would run upwards of $50,000. My old snow-retaining wall, perfectly stable for decades, was now labeled a nuisance. Sal tapped the compacted snow, a warning in his gravelly tone. "Boss, this isn't speculation. You remove it, the slope will move. Not maybe will." Claire interjected safety neighborhood aesthetics. "I'm only asking what's reasonable for the community." Her voice stripped authority. Every word was designed to pressure the city and me into submission. Gary flipped through his binder. "Sir, the order is final. You have until Friday. Failure to comply, $500 daily fines." The stakes were clear. One misstep, one ignored regulation, and the snow behind my wall would obey gravity. The city insisted I act. Claire ensured I could not mitigate, and the contractor confirmed the hazard. Friday arrived. The sky was a dull gray, the air sharp and biting. A winter storm had parked itself over the neighborhood, drifting snow piling higher on the slope every hour. Sal arrived at 7:00 a.m. with his massive excavator diesel engine rumbling like a warning drum. "Ready, boss?" he asked, climbing into the cab. "Let her rip," I said. The first row of snow-retaining barriers came loose with a cracked snow and clay shifting violently down the slope. Each tie pulled was another countdown ticking toward disaster. I watched from the balcony, coffee in hand, while the Avalanche silently readied itself. Claire appeared at her sunroom, sipping her morning coffee, oblivious to the physics about to ruin her day. By noon, the wall was gone. The slope was exposed, a white river of snow compacted against her garage edge. I followed protocol, stapling orange safety fencing along the perimeter as a mockery, barely enough to stop a toddler, certainly not hundreds of tons of winter accumulation. Sal handed me the invoice, stamped in red ink. Work performed under protest. Extreme risk of slope failure acknowledged. I nodded already, anticipating the snow's inevitable march. That evening, the storm intensified. Flakes pelted the driveway, piling on top of the compacted mass. At 11:30 p.m., it began. A slow shift, barely noticeable at first. Then a rumble, a low mechanical growl as hundreds of tons of snow broke free. The avalanche hit the garage doors like a battering ram. Tires, hoods, mirrors, 5 cars buried instantly, white and pristine, replaced by chaos. Claire screamed, running outside in a fur-lined robe, frozen in disbelief as her HOA authority dissolved into helpless panic. I stood on the balcony, coffee untouched, watching physics and bureaucracy collide. A police cruiser's lights reflected off the snow as a deputy carefully stepped over the frozen chaos. I smiled faintly. Every warning, every paperwork, every blocked permit had aligned perfectly. Claire had orchestrated her own disaster, she just didn't realize who really controlled the slope. The snow rolled on relentless, unstoppable, and the damage was complete. By the end of the night, the point of no return had been reached. The snow had done what the city and HOA could not enforce, and the avalanche left no room for denial, argument, or negotiation. Claire's collection, her pride, her power, was gone. The avalanche hit first a wall of snow and clay roaring down the slope. 5 gleaming cars, Claire Wells's prized collection, were instantly buried under white fury. The garage doors buckled metal, groaning tires, disappearing beneath the snow mass. Claire appeared on her sunroom balcony, fur-lined robe flapping, shouting at me across the frozen chaos. "You'll pay for this. This is criminal." Her HOA authority, her entire persona dissolved in panic. I stepped onto my balcony, coffee mug in hand, holding the stack of city paperwork like a shield. I followed the city's orders. The wall had to be removed. Replacement denied. A police cruiser screeched to a stop at the curb lights, bouncing off the snow. Deputy Miller emerged, carefully navigating the slippery slope. "Sir, are you responsible for this?" "I acted under official orders," I said calmly, holding up the abatement notice and the permit denial. Snow crashed against the garage again, settling with a heavy final thud. Claire's face paled, the HOA gavel she wielded mentally evaporating under the weight of physics. Neighbors peered from windows, whispers of disbelief spreading through the cul-de-sac. The snow had acted faster and more decisively than any HOA mandate ever could. I handed Deputy Miller a USB drive along with a sealed envelope of paperwork, abatement orders, denial of replacement permits, and recorded conversations with the inspector. "Here's everything I said. City order, contractor warnings. Claire Wells blocked all mitigation, all documented." The deputy skimmed the documents, eyes widening as he processed the chain of responsibility. Claire's authority, which she had wielded like a sword, had no legal backing in the face of recorded evidence. The avalanche had already destroyed her cars. The snow and clay had buried 5 luxury vehicles completely. Tires, hoods, mirrors, and paintwork were gone under the white tide. It was catastrophic, yet legally I was protected. Every warning, every call to the city, every blocked permit, everything pointed to the HOA president's overreach. Claire opened her mouth, trying to argue, but Deputy Miller shook his head. "Ma'am, you're going to need to contact your insurance." He followed city orders exactly. The snow settled. Silence filled the street except for the occasional drip and slide as residual snow shifted in the driveway. Claire's face drained of color, realizing that her HOA status and threats carried no weight against physics and paperwork. The final collapse was psychological. Claire staggered back from the balcony, eyes wide, watching the devastation she had inadvertently caused. Her 5-car collection, her pride, her social leverage, her HOA credentials was gone, buried, unusable. Deputy Miller's voice cut through the cold air. "Sir, legally, you're in the clear. You acted under orders, followed protocol, and documented all warnings." Claire could only gasp, grasping at words that no longer mattered. "But my cars." Her HOA aura, meticulously cultivated over months, crumbled. The insurance adjusters arrived hours later, eyes on the wreckage, and quickly confirmed the destruction was total, but liability rested on Claire's shoulders. By blocking a replacement wall and demanding immediate removal, she had contributed to the disaster. Any restitution would come from her, not me. Neighbors stepped onto their driveways, quietly murmuring, witnessing the collapse of a HOA titan. Claire Wells, who had once dictated visual perfection and neighborhood conformity, now had nothing but snow and a ruined reputation. I stood on my balcony, finally setting down my coffee. The avalanche had done what city orders and bureaucracy could not. It humbled the HOA president physically and socially. The snow drifted quietly over the remnants of the garage, a cold, white blanket of justice. And somewhere in that frozen silence, I realized this was only the beginning of reclaiming control over my property and my neighborhood. The morning after the avalanche, the neighborhood was quiet in a way it hadn't been for months. Snow still lay thick along the slopes, but the chaos had settled. I stepped outside onto my balcony, coffee in hand, and watched the sun catch the icy crystals glinting off the driveway. The garage below was a frozen tomb of 5 luxury cars, Claire Wells' entire collection. Neighbors slowly emerged from their homes, winter boots crunching against the hardened snow. Whispers spread like wildfire, astonishment, relief, and a grudging respect for how the situation had been handled. One of them muttered, "Finally, someone taught the HOA a lesson." Another shook her head, laughing nervously. "I can't believe she actually blocked the replacement wall herself." A few came closer, cautious but curious to see if I needed help or simply to witness the aftermath. Their expressions said it all. Claire Wells, the iron-fisted HOA president, had finally been humbled. Everyone had witnessed the avalanche, and the proof was undeniable. Snow gravity and bureaucracy had done what polite warnings and HOA letters never could. I felt a calm settle over me for the first time in weeks. My property, my slope, and my winter preparations were intact. I could move freely across my deck without bracing for confrontation or fearing a new letter from the HOA. The community, for the first time, seemed to understand the balance of power and the consequences of overreach. By late morning, the city had officially rescinded the daily fines. Emergency permits were issued for slope stabilization, allowing me to construct a proper snow-retaining wall, complete with reinforced cinder blocks and limestone facing. The documents were clear. No unilateral HOA interference could block legally compliant improvements in the future. Insurance teams arrived shortly after assessing the 5-car disaster. After reviewing all documentation, city orders, permit denial, recorded conversations, and contractor warnings, they concluded liability rested entirely on Claire Wells. By obstructing mitigation and blocking a replacement wall, she had contributed to her own losses. Claims for total replacement, including garage repairs, would be billed against her policy. The HOA board had no legal recourse. Their president's authority was effectively neutered. Letters went out to the neighborhood, clarifying that city code and safety regulations superseded HOA aesthetic mandates when they conflicted with stability or life safety risks. Claire's overreach had backfired spectacularly, leaving her financially responsible, publicly embarrassed, and stripped of unilateral control over the community. Meanwhile, the contractor Sal Marino began work on the reinforced wall. Every block, every layer was installed under city inspection. Claire's block to permit her aesthetic objections. All of it was moot. The slope was stabilized, and the neighborhood finally had a clear, enforceable standard for snow retention and property safety. Weeks later, the reinforced wall was complete. Limestone facing gleamed softly against the winter sun, a perfect blend of functionality and aesthetic compliance. The slope was stable, and my snow-retaining system would prevent any repeat of the avalanche. The garage below, now cleared of debris, stood as a reminder the consequences of entitlement and obstruction can be swift and absolute. Claire Wells moved out quietly. Her new homeowners arrived, surveying the slope and the reinforced wall, oblivious to the winter disaster that had just occurred. I waved, welcome to the neighborhood, and they waved back, smiling at the sturdy, elegant wall that now protected their property as well. Neighbors returned to their routines, respectful but wary of HOA overreach. I walked the slope, carefully inspecting the new wall, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. The snow had fallen, the avalanche had struck, and the bureaucracy had been navigated perfectly. Justice, in its cold, deliberate way, had been served. I poured a fresh cup of coffee, gazing across my property and down at the stabilized slope. The winter sunlight glinted off the limestone, and, for the first time in months, I felt complete control over my land. Claire Wells' lessons in hubris had been taught, observed, and recorded. Sometimes snow doesn't just cover the ground, it reveals who really holds the power.